All right, good evening. Welcome back to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. For today, April 28th, we have a great guest speaker tonight. Lou Hernandez is going to be talking about his book on John Mcgraw entitled Manager of Giants, the Tactics, Temper, and True Record of John Mcgraw. Before we start with that, just a few notes. Today is Jackie Brandt's birthday. He's one of the 11 remaining New York Giants. And his daughter reached out to me on Facebook. And I think she and a real New York Giant will be coming on at some point in the future. And it'd be great to have somebody who was a player on the Giants actually coming aboard. So hopefully that will come to fruition.
Cool.
Next Thursday, we have Jim Hirsch, who will be discussing his book on Willie Mays. Willie will turn 91 the following day. And hopefully Steve could work on another sing-along for Willie. We'll see what happens.
Oh, I'd love that.
Yeah, I hope we all are hoping Steve recuperates. He was at a Arizona Diamondback game and forgot his glove. And that's what happens when you don't bring your glove. Right, Steve? I've only busted on if he knows that. The following week, we'll have a Wednesday meeting on May 11th with Peter Karasotis, who did the book on Felipe Alou, and Felipe Alou will be celebrating his birthday the next day. So I have a good lineup for the rest of May. June, July, August, and I'm working on September now, so everything is great. Hopefully Lou will come back. Lou also did another book on the 1933 New York Giants championship team with Bill Terry. But for now, Lou will be discussing John Mcgraw. So why don't we all give a nice welcome to Lou Hernandez. Lou, the floor is yours. Did Lou leave? I don't see him.
He might be in Lou.
Oh my.
Well, we'll have to wait for him to pop back in. I gave him this nice
Intro.
Hope
you didn't scare him.
I might have scared him.
You could stop the tape, Gary, maybe. Stop the recording.
As long as everybody is polite, But so Jackie Brandt's daughter wrote hi, oh, thanks for remembering him. He's my dad. So I messaged her. She's very, very, very nice woman.
Where does she live?
It was, hi, I sent her some stuff. Here's Lou. Lou, did I say anything bad?
No, I guess it was a power surge here in the building, and it knocked me off the internet for a while. So
I gave you a nice introduction that you'll be hopefully speaking in the future on your 1933 book on the Giants World Series. But for tonight, why don't we again welcome Lou Hernandez is going to be talking about John Mcgraw. Lou, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone for allowing me into this special space of yours. I'd like to just start briefly by telling you all how I came to write a biography on one of the most famous managers in baseball history. I was writing a book on the 1933 New York Giants, Bill Terry's only championship club. And I had for that book in the outline, the first chapter dedicated to Mcgraw. As you all know, Mcgraw was the longtime manager of the New York Giants. And in early June 1932, he resigned due to illness and handed the team over to Terry. So I thought it would be a good segue for the 33 book to talk a little bit about McGraw and then go into the 33 team. However, the more I started researching and investigating McGraw, the more captivated I became by him, the more intrigued and the more fascinated I became by him. And eventually it just got to the point where I was just compelled, that's the best word I can use, to write a standalone biography on McGraw. I knew at the time that the prior biography that had been written about McGraw was in the late 1980s by a gentleman named Charles C. Alexander. So definitely sufficient time had passed to write something else about McGraw to push him into the spotlight, as it were. So that's how it all came about. I'd like to take you back even further to the beginning, to John McGraw's beginning. John McGraw was born April the 7th, 1873 in Truxton, New York. Truxton is a town in northwestern New York, south of Syracuse. In fact, if you were to find Syracuse on a map and just look due south, you'll run into Truxton. Now, McGraw was delivered by a Civil War surgeon, so that's how far back we're going here. McGraw's father, also named John, he served in the Civil War. In what capacity, we're not quite sure, but he probably served in one of the many regiments, Irish regiments that New York and other northeastern states gave to the Union at that time. Now, McGraw Sr. settled in Truxton. He married a young lady from the area named Ellen Comefort, C-O-M-E-F-O-R-T. And the McGraws settled down and had a family of 8 children. John McGraw Jr. was the second child born and the first male born. Now, when John Jr. was 10 years old, tragedy befell his family in a very severe way. There was an outbreak of diphtheria in the Truxton and surrounding region. Diphtheria is a bacterial disease that affects swallowing and eventually breathing. And diphtheria took John McGraw's mother and 3 of his siblings, all within a 30-day span. 2 of John McGraw's siblings died on the same day, if you can imagine that heartbreak. Diphtheria today has all been but vanquished by modern medicine and vaccines, but 140 years ago, it was a different story. Now, John Jr. was able to overcome that tragedy, and he did it through baseball. As he grew older in his teen years, he developed a talent for playing baseball, so much so that by the time he was 16, he was playing for a semi-pro team in Truxton. And the following year, when McGraw was 17, he signed his first major league contract with the Olean Club of the New York, Pennsylvania League. And that offseason, McGraw got a chance to travel not only outside of New York, but outside of the country. And he did that through what we would call today a barnstorming team. And McGraw traveled to Havana. And I just would like to read a quick passage from the autobiography that Blanche McGraw, McGraw's longtime wife, wrote in 1953. From the first time he sailed through the narrow entrance to beautiful Havana Harbor, John McGraw was captivated by the island. Cubans were the first people that John McGraw had ever seen, foreign people that John McGraw had ever seen, and he was very taken by their developed zeal for baseball. Now, the reason I mention that is because later in life, Blanche and John, with 1 or 2 exceptions, wintered every year in Havana. Now, John McGraw, that same 1891 year, latched on with the Cedar Rapids Club of the Illinois-Iowa League. And in the summer of that year, his contract was purchased by the Baltimore Orioles of the American Association. Now, the Baltimore Orioles, we're part of the American Association. The American Association was one of two major leagues at the time, along with the National League. And they called up Mcgraw. Mcgraw was able to play in 33 games for the Orioles that year. He was 18 years old. The following year, 1892, the American Association disbanded, but incorporated into the National League. Mcgraw played in twice as many games, 72, I believe it was. And by the following year, 1893, McGraw's age 20 season, Mcgraw became a full-time starter for the Orioles. Now, 1893 is a significant year for baseball. That was the year the mound was moved to 60 feet, 6 inches, and baseball developed into the game we most know today from that point on. Mcgraw developed into a very good player, outstanding player, you might say. He led the league in walks and runs scored on multiple occasions. He formed part of a quartet of players called the Big Four. They were known by the Big Four in the press. It was Mcgraw, Wee Willie Keeler, Huey Jennings, and Joe Kelly that formed that famous quartet. And I said Mcgraw was a good player. Mcgraw actually has the third highest lifetime on base percentage of anyone, behind Ted Williams and Babe Ruth. Although that record should be qualified a bit by stating that there was a quirky rule at the time in the 1890s when Mcgraw was a full-time player that did not count non-bunt fouls as strikes. So if you swung at a pitch and fouled it off that you weren't bunting at, it wasn't counted as a strike and you were at bat. In 1897, Mcgraw married a young lady from the Baltimore area named Minnie Doyle. And they were happily married for 2.5 years. Unfortunately, Minnie Mcgraw died of complications from a ruptured appendix. Mcgraw was playing with the Orioles in Louisville at the time, and he was summoned to the bench and told to go home immediately. Unfortunately, Mcgraw did not make it back to Baltimore in time, and his wife passed away. She was only 22 years old. There was a big write-up in the paper about her funeral. She was buried in her wedding gown, the same wedding gown she had worn for the first and only time 2.5 years earlier. So here's John Mcgraw, age 26, and he's had another really crushing tragedy that's befallen him. And somehow, again, I say through baseball, he was able to not only survive these tragedies, but thrive. John Mcgraw was as an outstanding player. In 1899, the same year that his wife passed away, Mcgraw became the first player to steal second, third, and home in the same inning. That happened July 4th, 1899. Now, I mentioned 1893 was a significant year for baseball. So too was 1901. 1901 was the year that Byron Bancroft Johnson and a couple of other associates started the American League, and which changed baseball for the everlasting good of the sport. Now, Ban Johnson wanted to have a different brand of baseball for his new American League. It should be noted that in the 1890s, when Mcgraw played, baseball was a very rough and tumble sport. Players fought with each other on the field, fans fought with each other in the stands, and umpires were grossly disrespected. Ban Johnson wanted to change that. He wanted to brand his new league, to use a contemporary term, into a more kinder, gentler league. He wanted to attract younger fans. He wanted to attract women to the game. He wanted baseball to become a family atmosphere. And the Baltimore Orioles in 1901 incorporated into Ban Johnson's new league. And Johnson not only convinced the franchise owners to come into his league, but he convinced the owners to hire John Mcgraw as the manager. Now, in this situation, Ban Johnson was making a pact with the devil. And with the devil, I am referring to John Mcgraw, who was a very belligerent player when he played. If everyone can think of the most belligerent personalities in baseball, you probably think of Ty Cobb, Leo DeRocher, Billy Martin. John Mcgraw had more fights than all of those players and managers and anybody else you can think of combined. Let me just read a quick list of the people John Mcgraw actually had physical altercations with. John Mcgraw fought with teammates, underlings, opposing players, other managers, umpires, of course. He fought with fans, including a 13-year-old boy. He fought with policemen, and he berated league executives in the press, left and right. So basically what I'm saying is John Mcgraw did not change his ways when he came over to the American League, Ban Johnson's league. Johnson ended up suspending him several times during the season, and Mcgraw ended up betraying Johnson by jumping over to the National League to manage the New York Giants in 1902. Now, one can look at why Ban Johnson did this. He knew about Mcgraw's history, but I feel that he just, in Mcgraw, he saw someone that was famous and someone that could help legitimize his league very quickly. But it did not pay off for Johnson. Mcgraw, as I mentioned, he betrayed Johnson by skipping over to the National League. Not only that, he brought over many of the Baltimore Orioles' best players, including most notably Joe McGinnity, who went on to have a Hall of Fame career. So the team John Mcgraw joined in 1902 for the Giants was a franchise that was a perennial loser. The Giants' last glory, I believe, dated back, championship glory dated back to the late 1880s, early 1890s. So it was a long time the Giants had a winning team. But to his credit, Mcgraw turned the Giants around, and for the next 30 years as manager, he won 10 pennants, finished in second place 10 times, and only twice in that 30-year span did the Giants finish in the second division. Now, I mentioned Mcgraw's fame, and he grew even more as far as fame, popularity, thanks to the New York press, being in the media capital of the world, all the daily newspapers that were available in New York at the time, daily, morning, and afternoon. So it is not an exaggeration to say that for the first 2 decades of the 20th century, taking into consideration Mcgraw's fame as a player in the 1890s and his immense fame that he grew to achieve as a manager with his winning teams, it is not an exaggeration to say that for the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the name John Mcgraw was the most recognized name in baseball. That changed, of course, right around 1920 with the advent of a guy named George Herman Ruth. Now, I mentioned Mcgraw won 10 pennants. He went to the World Series 9 times, and he won, rather disappointingly, only 3 of those 9 World Series appearances. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about those World Series appearances, especially the ones I think that Mcgraw, either through mismanagement or inactivity, actually cost the Giants fans at least 1, if not 2 additional World Series titles. You know, as fans, second guessing a manager is part of a fan's nature. I feel it helps spur lively conversation and lively discussion. So Mcgraw's first championship was 1904, and That year, McGraw and his owner, John T. Brush, decided not to play a World Series. The World Series had started the year before in 1903. John T. Brush and McGraw had a kindred spirit in his hatred or his big animosity toward Ban Johnson and the American League. It so happened that before Brush bought the Giants, he was a minor league owner in Cincinnati. And there happened to be a sports writer there named Ban Johnson writing for one of the Cincinnati newspapers. And Johnson apparently was critical of John T. Brush's handling, his operation of the ball club. And Brush never forgave Johnson for that. So he held a grudge, and he partnered with McGraw in deciding not to play the World Series rather arrogantly. McGraw stated that the National League was the superior team and they didn't have to play the winner of the inferior league. And it backfired on the two because the Giants players themselves ended up revolting because they were denied postseason money, additional money to their regular salaries. And John T. Brush ended up having to pay all the players on the team a stipend for missing that postseason action. In fact, it was reported in the paper that Brush ended up paying Christy Matheson $1,000 to appease him. Not every Giant player, of course, got $1,000, but Matheson, as the budding star, he received the most. Now, Brush and McGraw did not make the same mistake the following year. The Giants repeated as champions, and they played Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics, and John McGraw won his first World Series title. That was the series where Christy Matheson just burst onto the scene, throwing 3 complete game shutouts in what was it, a span of 5 or 6 days. So McGraw had his first championship. McGraw did not win again until 1911, when he put together a string of 3 consecutive championship ball clubs. That was McGraw's 3rd, 4th, and 5th pennant winning teams, and his 2nd, 3rd, and 4th trip to the World Series. Now, the Giants were beaten in 1911 by a better Connie Mack team, and they were also beaten in 1913 by the same Connie Mack team, which had an outstanding pitching staff. In fact, in that World Series, Connie Mack only used 4 pitchers, and one of the pitchers only pitched 1 inning. So basically, it was 3 pitchers that dominated the McGraw's team. Mack won in 5 games. The series I want to focus on is the one in the middle, the 1912 World Series, where the Giants played the Boston Red Sox. The 1912 Giants had a left-handed pitcher named Rube Marquard, and Marquard won 19 games in a row, or 19 decisions in a row that season, which is still a record today. And Christy Matheson was also a 20-game winner that season. But John McGraw decided to start in the first game of the World Series a right-handed pitcher named Jeff Tesreau. Now, Tesreau, granted, was the Giants' best pitcher in the month of September coming down the stretch. He was 6-0 with a real low ERA. But Marquard was a left-hander, and he was the Giants' winningest pitcher with 26 victories. Matheson also, as I said, won 20 games. But McGraw started Tesreau in that first game, even knowing that the Red Sox 2 best hitters were both left-handed hitters, Tris Speaker and Larry Gardner. Well, Tesreau started, and he was defeated by Smokey Joe Wood. 4-3 was the score. Matheson started the second game, and his defense just completely let him down. He was charged with 600 runs. That was the only runs that the Red Sox scored against Matheson, and he pitched into the 10th inning. The Giants were able to also score 6 runs to force extra innings. The game was called due to darkness after 10 innings. And finally, in the 3rd game, McGraw started Marquard. Marquard only got 2 starts in that World Series, and he won both of them by complete game. In the 18 innings that he pitched, he had an ERA of 0.50. So in spite of McGraw's cuteness, what I call it, getting cute there, instead of sticking to the pitching pecking order as it was, which still holds true today. You want to always start your winningest pitcher, your best pitcher to open any postseason series. In spite of that, the Giants still had a chance to win that World Series. That series ended with the famous game that involved Snodgrass's muff, but still, Christy Matheson took a 2-1 lead into the bottom of the 9th inning in the final game. That inning also had a play where a foul pop dropped in between Matheson and catcher Chief Myers and another Giants infielder, which could have easily been caught. And Speaker used the new life to get a hit to tie the score. And the Red Sox eventually won on a sacrifice fly. That last game of that World Series resembles a lot the last game of the 2001, World Series, when Mariano Rivera took a 2-1 lead into the bottom of the 9th inning against the Arizona Diamondbacks, and the Arizona Diamondbacks scored 2 runs to win the World Championship. Both of those games featured Matheson and Rivera throwing multiple pitches that could have decided the outcome of the series for either team, depending on the result of the pitch. So I really think that had McGraw started Marquardt in the series, that game would never have been played. There would never have been a Snodgrass muff, and the Giants and McGraw would have had their second World Series title. Now, the next time the Giants won the World Series or the pennant was 1917. And their opponents were the Chicago White Sox. Now here I have another bone of contention to pick with McGraw. The series was tied at 2 games apiece going into the 5th game, and the Giants held a 5-2 lead going into the bottom of the 9th. The 5th game was played in Chicago. Going into the bottom of the 7th, 5-2 lead going into the bottom of the 7th. Giants starter Slim Sally opened the 7th inning, and McGraw basically sat on his hands during that entire inning. He let Sally cough up a 3-run lead. And keep in mind, this is an era where home runs are very scarce. So you scored runs on hits or walks, or if you were lucky, an occasional error here or there. And not only did McGraw let Sally cough up the lead, he let Sally come out for the 8th inning again. And Sally gave up 3 more runs, or 3 more runs were charged to Sally's record, even though one of them was unearned. And the White Sox ended up winning 8-5. It was a very demoralizing loss for the Giants. No starting pitcher should be allowed to give up 6 runs in the 7th and 8th inning of any ball game, let alone a World Series game. After an off day for travel, the Giants came back down 3-2 to the Polo Grounds, and they were just flat. Red Faber beat them 4-2. So if McGraw had been a little bit more proactive, I say the Giants could have won that 5th game and gone back home with a 3-2 lead, and I think things would have been quite different. Now, the next time the Giants were in postseason, it was 1921, and it was the start of a string of 4 straight pennants for McGraw, his last pennants as Giants manager. And 1921 was a year in which the World Series was a best of 9 series. It was the last time that format was used. But the Giants defeated their crosstown rivals, the New York Yankees. They won 5 out of the 8 games played. Babe Ruth was only able to play 6 of those games. He had elbow issues and knee problems. And one of the games he actually pinch hit. So he only played in 5 of the games. And the Giants pitching held him in check. Ruth had a little bit better series the following season when the Giants and the Yankees repeated as respective champions. Ruth hit .313 and got his first World Series home run. But again, the Giants pitching prevailed, and they beat the Yankees in a best-of-7 series. I believe they won in 6 games. Now, 1923, again, it was another Subway Series. And here again, I have to question Mcgraw's managing. Although in this case, the Giants were down in the series 3-2 in the 6th game, and being played at the Polo Ground. Art Neff was pitching for the Giants. Art Neff, by the way, was one of the most outstanding pitchers in World Series history. He's the only pitcher to throw 2 1-0 shutout victories in the World Series. So Art Neff took a 4-1 lead into the bottom of the 8th inning, or I'm sorry, the top of the 8th inning. It's in the Polo Grounds, and he got the first out of the inning. But then the next batter singled, the next batter singled, the next batter walked, and the next batter walked, forcing in a run. And finally, John Mcgraw took him out of the game. Again, John Mcgraw let the tying runs get on base before he made a pitching decision to remove the pitcher, which was an obvious decision, I guess, to most everyone except him. Mcgraw brought in Rosie Ryan, a right-handed pitcher, and Ryan promptly walked the first batter he faced to force in the Giants' first run of the inning. And then up came Babe Ruth with the bases loaded, and the Yankees down 4-2. Now, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, anyone can feel free to check me, but this is the only time I believe that Babe Ruth batted in the World Series with the bases loaded. It's certainly the only time he batted with the World Series, in the World Series with the bases loaded and the game on the line. And it must have been just a thrilling at bat. Rosie Ryan struck out Babe Ruth with the bases loaded. And it looked like if Ryan got one more out, that the Giants may have escaped the inning and may have won the game and forced a 7th game. As we know, anybody can win a 7th game. But the next batter singled, 2 runs scored, and another run scored on an error. And the final score was 6-4. The Yankees scored 5 runs in the top of the 8th inning. And I just want to read a quote from Art Neff that he said after the game. And you can hear the pain in Neff's voice. "I could not help it," he said. "It had been a strain all through those innings when they failed to hit me." So what he was saying is he had 7 stressful innings before that climactic 8th inning. In the 8th, this is Neff, in the 8th, after Ward was out, which was the first out he got in the inning, and Shang hit, which was the first hit he gave up, my arm would not go on. Yet Mcgraw let him pitch the 2 more batters, which he walked. Now, a writer wrote that Mcgraw just sat Sphinx-like on a New York bench with arms folded. So that pretty much capsulizes Mcgraw's inactivity during that pivotal game. 1924 World Series, another famous series, and another series that I think the Giants may have had a good chance of winning. Again, it was a situation similar to the prior season. Giants pitcher Virgil Barnes took a 3-1 lead into the 7th and deciding game, took the lead into the bottom of the 8th of the 7th and deciding game. And again, just like Neff the year before, he got the first out of the inning, but then he gave up a double and a single. And then Bucky Harris came up. The single got the runner to third, by the way. So it was runners on first and third, 3-1 game. Bucky Harris came up, and from all accounts, he hit a ground ball towards third, and the ball somehow got past Lindstrom, either on a bad hop. Freddie Lindstrom was the third baseman, and Washington ended up. I mentioned it was the Washington Senators. Washington ended up tying the game in that inning, and The game went into extra innings. Walter Johnson came in to relieve in the 10th inning, and the crowd went wild at Griffin Stadium. Johnson pitched 3 shutout innings, and Washington ended up winning in the bottom of the 12th on a similar play with a bad hop, either over the head of Lindstrom at third or past him somehow at that base. Washington won 4-3. Again, if Mcgraw had been a little bit more proactive with Virgil Barnes in the 8th inning, things might have been different. There might not have been extra innings. So not to make it sound like I'm Mcgraw bashing, even though I prefaced everything by saying it's a fan's right to second guess. Let me talk a little bit about some of the positive aspects of John Mcgraw. John Mcgraw was at the vanguard of various things. In the 1890s, his Baltimore Orioles club was credited with initiating the hit and run as a strategic method of baseball. They also were the first to employ the Baltimore chop, where you hit down purposely on the ball in order to try to beat the play to first. Mcgraw was also at the vanguard of player substitutions, especially in pitching and in pinch running, which makes it even more disappointing why he was just so he was not proactive in some of his pitching choices in the National League, which I just mentioned. I'll read you something that came out in the 2016 Baseball Research Journal, Sabres Baseball Research Journal by Brian Soderholm. From 1903, McGraw's first full season managing the Giants, the number of position player substitutions in the major league increased every year. Every year from 1908 to 1912, McGraw's position player substitutions were more than double the major league average. By 1912, the number of in-game position player substitution over the course of a major league season tripled from an average of 23 per team in 1903 to 69 per team. Mcgraw was also a proponent of platooning. He saw the incredibly great results that George Stallings, the manager of the 1914 Miracle Braves, got with platooning, and Mcgraw was sold on platooning after that. Mcgraw also, from 1903 to 1909, a Giants pitcher, headed the league in games finished 4 times. And if saves had been an official stat at that time, the Giants would have accounted for nearly 1/3 the number of recorded saves in the National League. So Mcgraw used pitchers and he used substitutions more than any other manager. And that has become obviously the norm for today's game and became the norm many decades later. What wasn't the norm was the hit and run. In fact, bunting was the norm for many years after Mcgraw, and for many decades before analytics has told us that sacrificing the runner from first to second is not always the best strategy as far as percentage wise. Before that, I know when I was growing up, every manager, once the initial runner got on first base to open an inning, would bunt the player over. This is from Bill James. Again, we're talking about bunting and how Mcgraw went against the stream, as it were, when it came to that. From 1909 forward, the Giants bunted less than any other National League team. The Giants were last in the league in sacrifice hits in 1909, 1912, 1913, 15, 1920, 1925, 1926, 31, and 32. And this is something from the 1917 Sporting Life magazine. John Mcgraw still clings to the idea that the sacrifice hit does not obtain desired results. It is the belief of the leader of the Giants, or it is this belief of the leader of the Giants that stands practically unsupported among major league field marshals. Yet McGraw points to the fact that his teams in former championship years have come out on top by adopting the hit and run strategy. Now, McGraw was also progressive in a different area, different aspect of the game. McGraw signed the first Hispanic player on the New York Giants, a pitcher named Emilio Palmeiro. Palmeiro first pitched for the Giants in 1915. He got into 2 games. He lost both of them, although the second one, he lost 1-0, where he pitched a complete game, lost 1-0. Palmeiro had a short career in the major leagues. He later went on to play for another team, and I think he ended up his career with the Boston Braves. But speaking of progressiveness, in 1901, McGraw's first year managing the Baltimore Orioles, he tried to sign an African-American player named Charlie Grant. Charlie Grant was a player for a Negro League team in Chicago called the Chicago Giants. McGraw tried to sign him and pass him off as a Native American. Now, Grant happened to be an exceptional player, and a couple of the sports writers got wind of the fact that he had played for the Negro League team and he was not a Native American. And Van Johnson and all the owners of both leagues came down on McGraw like a ton of bricks and put a screeching halt to that plan. And I really believe had McGraw not been rebuffed so strongly, so stringently in 1901, that he would have signed Jose Mendez, who was an Afro-Cuban pitcher who reached Cooperstown through the Negro Leagues Veterans Committee voting. McGraw would have signed him in 1911. McGraw took a barnstorm team to Cuba in 1911. And he, there's a lot of quotes about McGraw and what he thought of Mendez. And although he didn't come out to saying that he would sign Mendez, he just said that Mendez would easily have been an outstanding pitcher in the major leagues. McGraw, when he came over to the Giants, I mentioned he not only brought over good players, but he also brought over the trainer of the Baltimore Orioles, a man named Edward Mackel. And Mackel was an African-American. Mackel died in the early 1920s, and McGraw replaced him with 2 other African-American trainers. And then before McGraw left, there was another African-American trainer on the Giants named Johnny Jameson, who happened to be a decorated war hero from World War I. McGraw never drove in his life. He never got a license, but he did have a chauffeur, and his chauffeur was also Black. So those are some positive aspects about McGraw to balance the presentation a little bit. He was at the forefront of many things. Let me just go back one more quote by Bill James. This comes from Bill James. He wrote a book about managers, and he was comparing McGraw and Connie Mack. And he wrote, although McGraw and Mack were products of essentially the same cultural background, McGraw would eagerly have signed Black players had he been able to. Mack might not have. So that's a good way to end that portion of the positive aspect of McGraw. The salient point I wanted to make about the book is that John McGraw managed many more fewer games than official records has him managing. By my count, he managed at least 679 fewer games than official records shows. Why that is, I don't know. I don't know if any of you guys know why baseball, being such a statistics-centric sport, somehow when it comes to managerial records, they just are lax. Branch Rickey before he became general manager of the executive, front office executive, not with Brooklyn and St. Louis and Pittsburgh. He managed the St. Louis Cardinals, but he never managed on Sunday due to religious beliefs. But those games are not docked on his account. And just this week, Alex Cora of the Red Sox, he missed 5 games due to the COVID protocol. Those games aren't going to be docked on his record. So again, to repeat myself, I don't know why our sports, which is so statistic centric, just does not, when it comes to managers is content to just go by the season schedule. Now, there were exceptions. In 1926, Mcgraw, coming out of Wrigley Field, was struck by a taxi and he fractured his leg and he missed a chunk of the season. And official records does take into account those games lost, although not all of them. Mcgraw missed all those games on the bench due to injury, suspensions, and illness. I mentioned Mcgraw was a belligerent player. He was ejected more times than any manager until Bobby Cox came along. In fact, Mcgraw, had he not stopped managing in the 1920s in his uniform, he would have probably had more ejections than any manager in history. Cox would never have been able to catch him. There's a rule that states if you cannot come up to the field if you are not wearing a uniform. So Mcgraw's ejections dropped from the time he decided to manage in street clothes and suit and tie, a la Connie Mack, until he retired. There's a big drop off in ejections there. He missed games due to suspension from those earlier ejections. Usually the suspensions were 3 to 5 days handed down by the league president, and Mcgraw missed games depending on how many games the Giants were to play during that span. However, Mcgraw missed the majority of his games due to illness. In 1903, during infield practice, Mcgraw was struck flush on the bridge of his nose by an errant throw from the outfield, and it caused Mcgraw sinus problems for the rest of his life, especially as he aged. Mcgraw ended up suffering from sinusitis. And as you can imagine, anything that has to do with the sinuses and breathing is something serious. I understand sinusitis also can cause blinding headaches. And as Mcgraw aged, the sinusitis just became worse and worse. And that's what caused him to miss the majority of games. Most notably, the 1927 season when Rogers Hornsby was a Giant. Mcgraw had to relinquish the team at the end of August, and Hornsby managed the Giants through all of September, and he did a great job. And Hornsby, I'm sure, demanded that those games be placed on his managerial record. I'm sure that's one of the reasons why those games were actually adjusted on Mcgraw's record. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that John Mcgraw handed over the New York Giants after 31 years as manager to Bill Terry in 1932, June 4th, 1932. He probably would have had to relinquish the team sooner rather than later because he became quite ill afterwards, although he was able in 1933 to return to the dugout as manager of the National League in the inaugural World Series, and he absorbed a 4-2 loss to Connie Mack. As a matter of fact, that was the inaugural All-Star game that Babe Ruth hit a game-winning 3-run homer. John Mcgraw died less than 2 years after he handed over the team to Terry. He died February 24th, 1934. His funeral was held 4 days later at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. It was written in the papers that February was the coldest February on record in New York up to that point. I don't know if that's been broken, that record's been broken yet. But the point is, it was a bitterly cold day, and 5,000 people came out to pay their last respects to John Mcgraw, and the majority of which had to stand outside in the shivering cold. Mcgraw was able to connect with a lot of different people at different levels, dignitaries, politicians, but also the everyman of New York. Now, I'd like to just wrap up things by giving you two quotes, one of which came out immediately following John Mcgraw's resignation, and the second was printed right after Mcgraw's death. Sorry. John Mcgraw was a fighter, a master showman, and a leader who was willing to take chances. He attracted the greatest players of his time to the Giants and gave the paying customers their money's worth. It is generally believed that no man associated with the sport in the United States has matched the lasting imprint of Mcgraw as manager of the Giants has left on our game. Now, this one is from Harold C. Burr, who was a Brooklyn Eagle beat writer. This one came after Mcgraw's death. The last of the swashbuckling managers has climbed the last dugout steps with the sudden passing of John Joseph Mcgraw, the man who made the Giants fanatically hated, respected, and beloved throughout the National League for 30 years. And with that, I say thank you for everyone who stuck around.
Hey, Lou, that was fabulous. Your knowledge on the subject, unsurpassed. Really, your statistics and what you stated to us was fabulous.
Thank you.
Lou, before we take questions, how could the society get your book if they so desire?
Through
What's the best way?
Amazon is the best place. Amazon, I always recommend to anybody. They have good service, good prices, and you can get the book pretty quick from them.
Perfect. And I have one comment and one question, and then we're going to go to Steve and Bill and whoever else. My comment is, based on what I'm seeing on the present field for the Giants, Gabe Kapler had to have read your book, because platooning is his major thing, and the Giants certainly don't bunt. So he must have been a big fan of John Mcgraw. And my other question is, we all hear what a magnificent manager he was. Did the press, you specifically stated times when you felt, hey, the Giants could have won more than 8 World Series as a franchise, maybe 10 or 11. Did the press come down hard on him for the stories that you're saying about, maybe not making the right moves?
Actually, not during the World Series. I gave you that Spinks quote, which was quite unusual. No, Mcgraw was not criticized at the time for these moves or lack of moves. The criticism did come later as Mcgraw aged and the Giants did not perform well. McGraw's last pennant was 1924, but he managed 7 more full years. And then the criticism did start coming, and that was probably a direct result of the team just not playing well. But I think Mcgraw kept winning, and he was somehow, I don't want to say isolated, maybe he was. The sports writers of the day, they did protect the players, and a manager like Mcgraw with his reputation certainly got that same measure of protection.
So today's writers might have a field day with some of those moves then.
Certainly. I mean, even the common fan, like myself, which again, second guessing a manager is great. As I mentioned, it spurs interesting conversation and lively discussion.
Thanks, Lou. Steve, you're up.
Yeah, I have a couple of points. Thanks so much. What a great presentation. You really
Thank you.
covered the topic from A to Z. I thought Ed Logan might be on with us tonight. I had the pleasure of listening to the tape that his father, Eddie Logan, who was the Giants clubhouse manager, he was the first one interviewed when the Giant magazine came out, and I believe it might have been 1979. And in his interview, he told several stories about Mcgraw. Now, his father, Fred Logan, was the clubhouse man at the time, and Eddie Logan was a kid and he kind of hung around the Polo Grounds. And every afternoon, he'd be waiting outside McGraw's office. McGraw would come out and give him a nickel. This lasted about 2 weeks. He's standing outside the office, and McGraw comes out and he says, "Mr. McGraw, can I have a quarter?" And McGraw gave him a nickel. So the nickel kind of stayed. I'm not sure if it was in the book, but you mentioned McGraw trying to bring in a black player. I believe he brought in a Jewish player to counteract the success that Babe Ruth had at the Polo Grounds, feeling that there was a lot of Jewish people in Washington Heights. Either it was Rosen or Cohen, I'm not sure, but he never panned out. So that part didn't work. But don't you agree? The big reason for the Giants being, I guess, the best team in New York for the first quarter of a century, a lot of that has to go to McGraw.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. McGraw brought in the players. He had a network of friends and scouts that helped him sign and find these what eventually turned into Hall of Fame players. You can just talk about Mel Ott, the left-handed pitcher. His name escapes me right now.
Marquardt?
No, he won a lot of games for he's in the Hall of Fame. Gosh, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
Somebody will.
But there was a lot of players that McGraw did end up signing. In the book, I also critique McGraw's signings and his trades. Not all the time. Again, trades are hit and miss, so I qualify myself with that. But not all the times his trades were very good. He traded away Hack Wilson for one thing. He made another couple of bad trades. The Giants franchise probably made the worst decision in their history when they let Rogers Hornsby go. McGraw was not involved in that decision. He was out of town. I think he was in Havana at the time. But Hornsby got into an argument with Charles Stoneham in the press and the traveling secretary at the time. And the Giants just let Hornsby go in a trade with the Boston Braves for a couple of players and a song. And here's one of the greatest players of all time. So to me, that was the worst mistake in Giants franchise history.
Paul Hubble was the man you think.
Thank you.
And no, Andy McHugh just posted it. So.
Paul Hubble. I said it, but I was muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Bill Klink, you're up. Bill, unmute.
I try to be compliant until it's my turn. First of all, great research. I mean, the depth of the research here. I didn't read any of these other McGraw books, but I can't imagine it being equal. One of his students, pupils, in those early years of 21, 22, we all know, and that's Casey Stengel, a comment on him. Apparently, he didn't learn either about, taking your best pitcher and starting him, because you look at 1960, and the Pirates were the beneficiaries of the fact that, Ford missed a start. He didn't start him in game one. Why? I don't know. You could, and that cost, well, obviously that probably was what cost Stengel his job. 2 years later, the Giants were the beneficiaries of some of the worst mismanaging of a staff in the ninth inning. So many of us remember that great game 3 in 62, because, I got a quote from Peranowski who says, "I should have pitched to Bailey, not Williams." I mean, there has been legions of mismanagement. Finally, a question. Did he not have a pitching coach that advised him, or he went to for any kind of advice? Did he totally handle all the pitchers and there was no pitching coach?
Yeah, there was no pitching coach. Usually, if you check retro sheet, you'll find who the Giants coaches were, and usually it was just two coaches and the manager. And those coaches usually were for the players, either a hitting coach or infield coach.
Okay.
And yeah, there was no mention of pitching coaches at the time. McGraw micromanaged. He had to be in control of everything. And I hope that answers your question, because
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
real quick, Casey Stengel. Casey Stengel had a great quote about McGraw years after his death. You mentioned he played with the Giants, and Stengel, I guess, was the first player to hit a home run, a World Series home run at Yankee Stadium. But anyway, Stengel said that McGraw, if batting helmets had been invented during McGraw's time, he would have made us players get hit in the head just to get on base. I always was tickled. I was always tickled by that quote by Casey Stengel.
That's a good one.
Thanks,
Stengel
Bill.
did learn about platooning, didn't he?
I think he did later on, right? With the Mets. I mean, he employed that all through the '69 and into the World Series, definitely.
Yeah.
Yankees too.
Thanks, Bill. Mars, you're up.
Yeah, by the way, Casey learned from McGraw, where he platooned many of the Yankee players as well during their 50s and 60s championship years. But what I wanted to ask, though, was, if McGraw didn't get along with a player like Frankie Fish, he dealt him. And I think, was it the trade for Fish to get Hornsby from the Cardinals?
Yes,
Wasn't
you're
that
right.
the trade?
Yep, you're certainly right.
Yeah. The main question I have, though, is McGraw was a part-time owner of the Giants. I guess what was it, Andrew Friedman? What percentage of the Giants did he own?
Actually, he became a part owner of the New York Exhibition Company, which was the parent company of the New York Giants. But that didn't occur till right around the 1920s, when Charles Stoneham was the owner of the franchise. And I think his ownership didn't go past much of 20% of the team. In fact, McGraw, during the stock market crash, he was not affected, because the only stock he owned was stock in the National Exhibition Company, which went to McGraw's two surviving siblings. He had two sisters that survived him, and they received his stock in the National Exhibition Company, which was the New York Giant parent company. Blanche McGraw got the remainder of his estate following his death.
So didn't McGraw make the decision not to renew Yankee Stadium, the Yankees renting the Polo Grounds, because of Ruth they were outdrawing the Giants?
Yeah, actually, he and the owner actually conspired against the Yankees, and they doubled their rent. And I think that was one of the things that spurred Jacob Rupert to build his own stadium. But he never denied the Giants the opportunity to continue playing the Polo Ground. Rupert just got, I guess, fed up with the exorbitant rent and decided to build his own ballpark.
Thank you very much, Lou.
Thank you, Mars. Steve King, you're up. Unmute, Steve. There you go.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the very interesting talk, Lou. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned about McGraw's involvement with the American League. And I've always thought that the four most important people in baseball history were Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson, obviously, but the other two are Van Johnson and John McGraw. Without either of whom, the American League wouldn't have been a valid institution, wouldn't have been able to sustain itself. And each of them, I think that a lot of the arguments between them was that each of them thought that each one was the most important person. And these were two tremendous egos. And I think that was really what felt. But without them, because Van Johnson behind the scenes setting up the structure, but it was McGraw who really broke the dam as far as National League players being hesitant about to sign with the American League, just fearing it would go the way of the other leagues that had challenged the National League and would just fall apart. And there was a threat that players would be boycotted from the National League if they jumped to the American League. And really, it was McGraw who was really the most important player then who did that, and just the other players who followed him over. And I think that's just so, though his time in the American League was obviously so brief, but I think the argument can be made that as far as his importance in baseball history, that was his greatest achievement, was the American League. Probably more than the years he managed the Giants. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I do agree with you when you said that McGraw and Johnson had big egos. Usually important men in high positions do have that big egos. I'm not sure about McGraw being the significant factor in the American League. He was certainly the significant factor in the National League. He made the New York Giants unequivocally. He turned the Giants into the flagship franchise of the National League. Now, there might be some truth in what you were saying about McGraw and maybe dissuading players from going over to the American League. But McGraw's real impact was with the Giants and with the National League. And I do agree, Ricky Johnson and that other, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who the other person you named. They were instrumental. They were very important figures, especially in the early period of baseball.
Thank you, Steve. Lou, I love the title of the book. Where'd you come up with that?
Actually, I've got to give credit to my publisher on that.
It's you know, when you first see it, you could you know, John McGraw manager, but the temper and tactics and true record, I think that adds a lot to the title of the story.
The book photo, McGraw's cover photo, is from his 1905 World Series championship. He had special uniforms designed for that World Series against the A's, and they were black uniforms, and somehow it seems, by the photos, it seems to have worked. Black with white trim.
Perfect. Ed Freer, you're up. Just unmute, Ed.
I've always been a big fan of John McGraw, but he did have ownership in a lot of pool halls, I believe, in the New York area. And you mentioned with the Black Sox, just before the Black Sox period, did Judge Landis, or did any of that come up in any of the trials right after the Black Sox with the McGraw?
Nothing that came out in the paper, although you are right, he was mentioned several times as being part owner of different pool halls that had gambling associated with. I'll tell you what was a high profile situation that Landis got involved in. McGraw and Stoneham were part owner of Oriental Park, which was a horse racing facility, a horse track in Havana. And Landis, one of his first edicts as commissioner in 1920, he made McGraw and Stoneham sell their interest in the Oriental horse track in Havana. So in that respect, yeah, I guess McGraw got the word or got the hint, and he probably stayed away from pool halls and things like that. Although he still enjoyed betting on the ponies, like many players of the day did at that time.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that the building where McGraw had his pool hall is still standing. It's right opposite Macy's on the east side of Herald Square, the Barberry building.
Really?
Yes, and
I didn't know that.
I think the last time I looked, it was a Victoria's Secret. So I'm not sure if it's still where he had his pool hall. So I'm not sure if that's an advancement in civilization or not. But it's an interesting how many sites that associated with him are still standing in New York City.
Thanks. Let's go to Mr. Met, Greg Prince.
Thanks, Gary. Lou, I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. You're mentioning Art Neff really brought me back, because it was right about 50 years ago this month or next month that I first read about the 1923 World Series, and I didn't know anything about it. and I was just so miserable that the Giants had lost. I wonder, when you're doing research and you know that these things have happened in the past, yet you sounded like truly frustrated with some of Mcgraw's decisions over the years. How deeply do you find yourself kind of pulled into these things as if they're really happening? And how does that maybe affect the way you write about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always look at anything I write or anything I research from try at least from an objective view, an objective position, as a good historian should. So I try to get all the facts, see both sides of the story, and then come to a conclusion and write it and let the reader end up making the final decision. So that's how I go about that. I try to stay as objective center as I can. But again, I am a big baseball fan, and I have my favorites, my favorite players. Again, I try to push that aside when I'm writing. But I am also a fan of the game and its history. And when I see something that I don't understand, what I like to really do is compare the eras as far as how baseball evolves with the rule changes and how the managers have evolved over the years. And of course, over the last, 20 years, analytics has completely just blown the lid off of our sport. In most cases, I think for the better, but not always. But that's how it is with change. But I think in the end, analytics and modern technology, it's going to win out. You just can't stop progress. But thanks for that.
Sure. Just a quick follow-up. After spending so much time with John Mcgraw, do you like him more? Do you like him less? Do you just feel like does he feel like a real person to you?
Yeah, I mean, he actually is a real person to me. Probably the better way I could put it is he's an actual persona, because it's not John Mcgraw as a player. It's not John Mcgraw as a manager. It's John Mcgraw as a persona, the persona he incorporated during his many years in the sport. And yeah, I do have an affinity. I always have an affinity with all my subjects, just like Bill Terry. I ended up with a incredible deal of respect for that man after I finished the 1933 book. He's an exceptional individual, and he was such an underrated player when he played, and it took such a long time for him to get into the Hall of Fame, shamefully so. And again, that has to do with the writers from the 1930s on. I mentioned Mcgraw was criticized. That's when the writers started really taking their gloves off. Not to the extent of today, of course, or the last 20 years, but Terry had problems with the writers, and that's what unfortunately delayed his entry into Cooperstown.
Thank you.
Judge, before you ask your question, have
Yes.
you, since you're up in Rochester, were you able to go to the monument in Truxton?
No,
Okay.
no, I haven't done that.
I just figured you were the closest one in the group.
Yeah. No, I haven't. And this is actually the first I've heard of that. That's kind of interesting.
The floor is yours, Judge.
Yeah, thank you. My question, Lou, I was interested in your comments about his pursuit of Cuban players. And I was wondering at that time in 1910-ish, like that, where would the Cuban players have been honing their skills? Were there organized leagues in Cuba that he was scouting, or were there barnstorming in the US? Where were they honing their skills that he would have been scouting them?
Yeah, he would have been scouting, and the players would have been in the Cuban Winter League. The Cuban Winter League started in the late 1870s.
Wow,
And
I didn't realize it went back that far.
Yeah, and before Fidel Castro's Marxist revolution abolished sports in Cuba, the Cuban Winter League was the second oldest league in professional baseball. Only the National League was an older league. It was older than the American League at the time.
Wow. I know Havana actually had a franchise in the International League. I know they played Rochester for a lot of years before, I think in the 50s.
Oh yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, there was a team called the Cuban Sugar Kings, owned by a famous, well, for the era, owner named Bobby Maduro. Bobby Maduro later, after the Marxist revolution in Cuba, ended up having to come to the United States. And he was the first, what you might call inter-American ambassador between Major League Baseball, organized baseball, and the winter leagues of Latin America. And he held that post for 13 years under Bowie Kuhn. Bowie Kuhn named him to that post in the 60s.
I didn't realize they had formal leagues as far back as in the 1870s. That surprises me, but thank you. That's interesting.
You're welcome.
Hey, Lou, listen, just terrific job. I really hope you come back and do the Terry speak about the book. I think the group would love that as well. We'll get you booked up if you like to do that, later on in this summer or fall.
Yes, thank you. Definitely.
Guys, give it up for Lou Hernandez. Just fabulous presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
If you're interested in any of Lou's books, Lou also does a lot of books on Spanish players in baseball and their 1933 World Series. Just go to Amazon. When I send out the Zoom, I will also put a link out to his books. So Lou, again,
over my shoulder, there's my last book there, just as a plug, Bobby Maduro and the Cuban Sugar Kings.
Thanks again, Lou. Give it up for Lou.
Thanks,
Thank
Lou.
you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Be well. Guys, I'll hang for a few minutes. I know some of you are very interested in the NFL draft and you want to go see what's going on with that. So have a great night, and we'll see you next